We're joined in studio by Luke Perry from Utica College. Good morning.
Good morning.
Of course, he does the NY-22 Minute. That's a blog, and you can find it at ucpublicaffairs.com. Did I get all that right?
Correct. Thank you.
How often you're putting posts up several times a week for information for those looking for the latest on the congressional race right here in our backyard?
Yeah, so I started this academic center at Utica College about a year and a half ago, and I've got a team of about 50 writers from around the world, political scientists, government practitioners. We write on a range of topics, domestic and international. And for me, starting last June, I started taking a close look at this congressional race in our area. And, every week or so, I'll write something up depending on what's going on. And my goal is to try to provide a little more information, a little more context, maybe bring a little political science to the table as people try to make sense of what's going on in the NY-22.
This is a race that is being watched, of course, in Washington, right? Because it can go either way here.
Yeah, it's a top 10 competitive race. Central New York, I think, is going to be significant in determining who controls the House of Representatives. And I know particularly the Democrats are looking at the 3 or 4 seats in our area as potential pickups, and I think NY-22 is at the top of that list.
So that's got to mean huge money being spent, too, from PACs and different special interest groups and stuff. You got to imagine that means it's going to get pretty mudslingy and pretty dirty here.
Yes, it's a long race, so that's the starting point. I mean, Anthony Brindisi declared very early in terms of most candidates the middle of last year. So you've got that element where there's just a lot going on for a long time. And then powerful interests on both sides of the political spectrum are going to try to do what they can to influence the outcome of the race. So, yes, that will translate into a lot of outside money and influence.
Everybody's going to be turning their TVs off by the end of July.
Particularly in the last few weeks, it'll be pretty intense.
So initially, after you talked about how Brindisi got in early, I remember the comments that Tenny made, and she's said a few things that have gotten her into some trouble and kind of gotten some criticism. But among them was like the whole telling the reporter, go look into Brindisi's father, and he's got, I don't want to misquote, but basically there was an allegation that there's a tie to what organized crime, basically, and she got hit pretty hard for that, the backlash. You've noted that Brindisi is also kind of throwing some punches as well.
Well, in the back and forth of campaign, there's going to, those things are going to happen. I wouldn't say Tenny and Brindisi are equivalent in that way. I think what you referenced at the beginning when Brindisi declared, Tenny knew that she was elected with less than 50% of the vote. Brindisi has fairly high likability, so her initial strategy was to go negative. She understood that many voters in the district were not aware of him outside of Oneida County, and so she was trying to portray him in negative terms and raise suspicion about him, and that was the strategy early on. Brindisi has said from the beginning that he's going to try to run a different type of campaign, one that focuses more on civility, and I think for the most part he's done that. The piece that I wrote had to do with social media, so if you spend any time on Twitter, you realize that you can get pretty snarky pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so I was just raising some questions about whether he was living up to the standard that he set for himself in regards to how he was communicating specifically on that social media platform. And I have to say, since I wrote the piece, there's been a notable difference in terms of some of the language that the campaign has used on Twitter. So it seems to have changed in a relatively short period of time.
You talked about, people knowing Brindisi outside of Oneida County, and I think typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Oneida County is really the main turnout, or the voter turnout for, and can ultimately sometimes decide this district. How do you feel the turnout is going to be in like Broome County and that area of the district in this race in particular?
I think it's hard to say at this point. I think certainly when you think about who's going to win in general terms and focus on geography, it starts with Oneida County. So
right.
Brindisi's going to try to flip Oneida County. And interestingly, both candidates are from the area, as you know. So that'll be sort of the foundation for whoever wins. And then in terms of Broome County, that's an area the Democrats tend to do well. So Brindisi will try to win Oneida County, do well in Broome County, and then most likely try to lower the victories that Tenny will have in the more rural counties. So that's just
which will be hard to
speaking.
do. Which will be hard to do.
Some places will be harder than others, yeah. So then I think, the question is, what rural counties are you going to focus on if you're Brindisi's campaign? Where do you think you have the best chance to close those margins? And Kim Myers, by most assessments, didn't run a particularly strong campaign, particularly in the northern part of the district. She wasn't here a lot. And so, and she got clobbered in rural counties. So I think the Democrats look at it as an opportunity. They're going to lose many of these towns and counties, but if they can close the margins, do well in Oneida County and down in Broome County, then it's going to be close.
It's interesting. You talk about Brindisi's likability, and I think he is a fairly likable guy. Contrast that with, I shouldn't just leave it like that. I believe his reputation has him as a fairly likable guy. I think to the average voter, they don't have a negative reaction to him. Maybe some do. Tenney gets a lot of criticism from leaders of her own party in this community. Obviously, that hurts her. Trump won this district quite heavily, if I remember correctly. You would think it tends to favor Claudia Tenney here in the upcoming election. Is that your take on that? Is how much does Trump matter, and how much does criticism of Tenney by local Republican leaders hurt her?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So my current book project I'm working on actually looks at how GOP incumbents in central New York are going to navigate the Trump presidency. So historically, from a political science perspective, a president's first midterm, his party loses seats. So the Republicans are going to lose seats. The question is how many and where. So GOP incumbents have to make a strategic choice about how they're going to align themselves. Are they going to sort of selectively align with Trump like John Katko has in NY-24, right? He didn't support Trump in the 2016 campaign. He's a Republican. He voted for the tax cut, but he's criticized Trump in other ways. He's sort of navigated an independent path. Claudia Tenney, on the other hand, has closely aligned herself both in policy and in style to Donald Trump. Why is she doing that? The best I can tell is because, as you mentioned, Trump did very well in the district in 2016. In fact, he outperformed her in the district by the second largest margin of any Republican elected in the House in 2016. And so I think she looks at her best chance of winning as trying to turn out Republican voters and try to do that in a way that gets them excited about her because she is like Trump. Now, the risk with that strategy is that Trump's popularity has declined significantly throughout New York State, including upstate New York, which, as we know, is more conservative and generally more supportive of the president. So Siena College has done some polling on this and documenting that. So yes, in 2016, that strategy worked for Tenney. It worked for Trump. The big question is whether that's going to work in 2018.
And I think nationwide it's tough, too, because, for the president, you talk about losing seats. You've got people like Paul Ryan that aren't running. I mean, they're just not running. So a lot of GOP leaders in the Senate, too, have decided I'm not running for re-election in the midterm. And then on top of that, you have Democrats that are actually maybe not aligning themselves with Trump, but saying, they're using language like, I'll work with Trump. I'll listen to what he has to say. I'll sit down with him. And that's actually, I think, helping in a lot of Democrat campaigns.
Yeah, a couple of quick things that are interesting that you touched on. One, there's 48 incumbent Republicans in Congress who are not running for re-election. That's historically high. Yeah, so incumbents are reelected over 90% of the time. So if there's no incumbent, then that's a really competitive seat. So that's unique in terms of what's going on here. Also, you mentioned President Trump. So obviously there's a lot of controversy about President Trump. People like him, people don't like him. There's a lot of debate and powerful feelings on either side. When you think about presidential popularity, again, from a political science perspective, typically the president is most popular when he's elected. And he has 100 days where people give him a chance and they like him. Yeah. And then the popularity plummets and it tends to level off. Obviously, there's nuances with each president. But, that's what Trump is dealing with and what every president deals with and helps explain why, the first midterm is kind of the referendum on him. Now, you mentioned Democrats working with Trump. You see a lot of that in the Senate. There are, I believe, 10 seats held by Democratic senators in states that Trump won. And that's where you see particularly Democrats saying, I'll work with Trump on this, that, and the other thing because they know that statewide Trump did really well. Yeah. But I think Democrats beyond that at large are pretty unified in their opposition to the president at this point.
All right, I want to ask you two more things, and one of them involves I guess you were out this weekend. You were at a town hall. So Brindisi is holding town halls. Tenney has held some discussions, I guess, with staffers there, not necessarily her. And then
she's on
and then she did a telephone.
Town halls.
She's done the telephone town halls. How much does Brindisi holding these town halls face to face in communities across the district? How much does that work? I know Tenny was under a lot of criticism before for not holding them. Are we at a point where that criticism has gone away for not holding the town hall? And how much does it help Brindisi to be face-to-face at events like this? Because I don't know, the turnout for these is huge.
Well, it varies, yeah. So that's an interesting question. Just to clarify, so I was at a town hall that Brindisi held in Little Falls, covering it for the center, and did a write-up on the website, as you referenced. The issue with town halls is one that Brindisi's campaign has raised. He thinks that it's important for a member of Congress to be accessible to constituents and have frequent opportunities for constituents to come, ask any question he or she wants, and be able to interact with their representative. And so he believes that that's a major shortcoming, as far as I can tell, in terms of Representative Tenney and her unwillingness to do this. Now, the Tenney campaign says, listen, I meet with constituents all the time. There were these coffees with Claudia that were held last year. She's had certain types of events. Some people call them town halls. Some people don't. Tenney calls them town halls because she's taking questions from constituents. Critics say, well, if you control who can say what,
you're
and you
screening
screen
who
questions,
can come.
that's not a town hall. Your listeners can decide for themselves where
Sure.
that stands. In terms of the impact, I think particularly from Brindisi, he's trying to enhance his name recognition. And so the more he gets out and meets with people, whether it's a crowd of 20 or a crowd of 200, that interpersonal connection is big for him. And so I think that's what he's trying to do. And then on the Tenney side, right, she's thinking strategically. She doesn't want to open herself up to some critic asking a question that makes her look bad. And, all elected officials have to make those kind of choices in terms of how far they're going to go publicly interacting with constituents.
Well, they were both out at the parade yesterday, so
I'm sure they
doing
were.
that.
Well, that's a
big
fun one, waving and shaking hands.
So here's what I want to ask you. I want to stick on this town hall, and then we'll let you go because I know you got a busy. I'm sure you have a million things to do. And again, it's ucpublicaffairs.com. It's the NY-22 Minute from Luke Perry. I envision when we talk about a town hall and when Claudia was being urged to hold a town hall, I picture a huge auditorium, let's say at Utica College, right, where she's there, hundreds of people, if not thousands from the community, probably hundreds come from the community, and they pepper her with questions, right? And some of them will be critical and some will be praiseworthy. I'm surprised to see that Brindisi's going around doing these town halls, but there's 30 people. How many? Is this typical, 30 people? I would just expect more people. And is it because it's not widely advertised that there aren't a slew of people showing up in support of him and maybe even some Tenney supporters who come to be critical of him?
Well, I think it really varies. So the one on Sunday, it's Memorial Day weekend. It was cold. It was rainy. He took questions from 30 people for 2 hours. He was standing straight, but it looked to me like he was pretty cold, right? So I can understand in that situation why maybe the turnout isn't, several dozen. It just it happened to be timing. He's done other ones this spring. This is his fifth one. I wasn't at it, but the one in Broome County, the one out in Hamilton, they had a couple hundred people there.
They did?
I believe, in terms of media reports and estimates and that kind of stuff. So I think it really just depends on the place. It depends on the time. And again, if you're running a campaign, obviously you want a lot of people to be there.
Sure.
And I believe both campaigns have publicized where their candidates are going. But you're really just trying to get geographically as many different places as possible as often as you can.
So, okay, and I'm glad you pointed that out because I was surprised. 30 people, but you're right. It's Memorial Day weekend.
And it was outdoors,
and
I didn't realize that.
He has had better showings as far as people coming out to ask questions and meet him at other events. All right, I love when you come on. Can you tell by the 4 pages worth of questions that I had prepared for you?
It's my pleasure. I enjoy coming here as well.
Again, the website is ucpublicaffairs.com. It's the NY-22 Minute. All the latest on the Brindisi-Tenney race, which is being carefully watched in Washington. It's a great source for information. Thank you for joining us. Luke Perry.
Thanks so much.